This week, a clearly panicked WWE went back to the Vince Russo formula of car crash TV, with barely any focus on wrestling, a lot of short segments, and a lot of wrestlers pulling double duty. With news on Shayna Baszler, Mickie James, Shawn Michaels and Shane McMahon, as well as much more, it is time for the WWE Raw review. Raw this week was built around two major appearances. That of Shawn Michaels, who was called in with a very late appearance to cover for Ric Flair having been written out, and that of Rey Mysterio, who is currently working without a contract in order to ensure that the WWE continues to push his son. Drew McIntyre opens the show, and in the midst of cutting what I'm going to assume is probably a very good promo, Retribution cuts the feed. We go backstage to the production truck where we see Retribution forcing production staff to go to the scheduled commercial break. That is the last appearance of Retribution on this show. The original plan was to use Retribution to shut down the Performance Center entirely, leading the WWE to move to the Amway Center as they had already planned. This was filmed but not used, and a large part of this was because of the amount of leaks that have happened recently. Of course, this is one of the primary reasons that the WWE want to go to the Amway Center to a live schedule so that people are unable to get that leaked information. The biggest leaks, of course, have been regarding Retribution as a faction and the Amway move, which everyone was seemingly aware of before it happened. Whereas with Raw Underground, while that was leaked, it was intentionally leaked to a lot of people to ensure that they could create a buzz after word initially got out. The WWE are apparently getting increasingly frustrated with the amount of information that they cannot keep secret. There is exclusive information you can't get anywhere else just like that in almost every single video, so be sure to subscribe before continuing. We go backstage where Drew McIntyre is rallying the troops, much like Big E did on SmackDown. He's interrupted by Seth Rollins talking about leadership, much like Baron Corbin did on SmackDown. This segment is almost completely recycled. Our first in-ring action is Apollo Crews versus Shelton Benjamin. This is a rematch from last week, a match which Apollo Crews lost. However, it is still not for the United States Championship. Apollo gets his win back here, ensuring that Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin will not be allowed to be at ringside for his match against MVP at SummerSlam. There is an attack from the Hurt Business immediately afterwards, but Apollo Crews is rescued by Ricochet, Cedric Alexander and Mustafa Ali. They are challenged to a 3-on-3 elimination match later in the night. Apollo Crews would choose Ricochet and Mustafa Ali due to an injury that Cedric Alexander supposedly picked up in the fight with Bobby Lashley, an injury which curiously vanished about an hour later. Angel Garza and Ivar flirt with the same girl, a girl who's been flirting with a lot of people recently. I'm guessing that's what she's famous for, but I couldn't tell you. There is a wonderful moment that shows how well she gets WWE when she's watching TV, much like I am watching that TV right now. We also discover at this point that Ivar has Jedi powers, but only when it comes to meat. He and Otis are going to get on really, really well. Shortly after this, we actually get a wrestling match which goes for about 3 minutes, in which Angel Garza defeats Ivar. It becomes secondary really to the storyline though, which doesn't involve the Viking Raiders at all, when it becomes clear from Angelo Dawkins backstage that there is a video clip he wants to share. Angel Garza goes charging backstage. Zelina Vega asks the knower of all things, Samoa Joe, who simply states that because of Retribution there is now extra security. This means that there is important video footage that Zelina Vega may need to watch, and is currently in the possession of Angelo Dawkins. Good moment here from Joe, who explains exactly how this came about in a logical way. We're not going to see much more of that during the night. Also, a key point worth mentioning is that they could have used Retribution or the SmackDown hacker to explain this particular storyline, but they chose not to. With the SmackDown hacker, it's because they are focused on SmackDown, and of course it's worth pointing out that Mustafa Ali, who was the original SmackDown hacker, has now been moved to Raw and as such can no longer fulfill the role. The video clip plays showing that Zelina Vega did in fact poison Montez Ford. Andrade did not know about this. This leads to the Street Profits attacking Andrade and Garza, and that's pretty much the end of the segment. No segment lasts very long in this show, except for recaps. Mickie James returns to the ring in a match against Natalya, but the WWE are much more interested in showing us Seth Rollins arguing with Samoa Joe, so I'm not going to bother talking about the match. Mickie James was apparently legitimately upset at the presentation of this backstage. The two segments, last week's interview backstage and of course this week's match, were filmed at the same time, so it definitely suggested that they would be broadcast at the same time. That did not happen. Instead we got this. What is going on, WWE? Sasha Banks and Bayley open the second hour with the draw segment. They will be facing off against Asuka and Shayna Baszler, which on paper sounds like an exciting match. If not for the fact that it lasted less than 15 minutes, Shayna Baszler was attacked by Nia Jax to start with, and when she finally did manage to get back to the ring, she won in short order by tapping out Bayley. Shayna Baszler, the only one who doesn't have a match at SummerSlam, was the only one who stood tall at the end of this. Again, very confusing choice for supposed go-home shows. Shawn Michaels talks to Drew McIntyre backstage and really puts over the Big Scott's journey and his character as an individual. Shawn Michaels has a very strong quarantine beard that he has grown in his time. That'll be especially helpful when he gets punted in the head later on. I would say spoilers, but the second it was announced, we all knew it was coming. This week's Ruby Riott segment involves Ruby Riott losing to Peyton Royce after accidentally attacking Liv Morgan. I swear we've seen this somewhere before. You know, like the last 10 weeks or so. Very basic paint-by-numbers storytelling here, as always. In easily the match of the night, this is not a good thing, Dolph Ziggler manages to put down Eric of the Viking Raiders using a sleeper in Raw Underground. It's actually very competitive. Dolph Ziggler leaning on his mat wrestling background, which you can really see at times, he's genuinely going for it, even though a match later in the night looks a lot more scripted. This looked real, and it was very impressive in that regard. It was, however, a 2-minute match featuring, I think, 3 punches and 2 wrestling holds, and still the match of the night. As an aside, this is very good for Dolph Ziggler, who has had a rough time recently, but has been recovering quite well in Raw Underground since being destroyed multiple times by Drew McIntyre. Rey Mysterio comes down to the ring and announces that he will be in his son's corner for the street fight at SummerSlam. This is good because apparently Dominic Mysterio doesn't have any friends, or at least none of them have any eyes. Rollins and Murphy come down and completely ignore Dominic Mysterio. They just both turn their back on him and ignore him completely, which allows him to beat them with sticks. Dumb. Just really dumb. And for someone like Seth Rollins, really out of character. If it seems like I'm rushing through this, it's because I am. No segment got more than 5 or 10 minutes. Absolutely baffling. Cedric Alexander is approached by MVP and hears him out, further teasing the idea that Cedric Alexander could be about to have a heel turn. My money's on Ricochet. The 6-man tag match between Apollo Crews, Mustafa Ali, who was eliminated within seconds, Ricochet, who is eliminated within seconds, against Shelton Benjamin, who is eliminated in seconds, MVP, who lasts more than a minute, well done you, and Bobby Lashley is eventually won by Bobby Lashley, which is good considering he's supposed to be the guy who's getting the push out of this. Everyone else is made to look very weak, including Shelton Benjamin, who is eliminated quickly and then loses his 24/7 championship to someone not even in the match. Cedric Alexander wins the 24/7 championship. I just don't know what to do with this. Almost immediately afterwards, Cedric Alexander defends the 24/7 championship against Akira Tozawa. The match was eventually won by Shelton Benjamin. Within the rules of the 24/7 championship, that actually makes the most sense of anything that has happened on this show so far. Marina Shafir and Jessamine Duke join Shayna Baszler in Raw Underground. They're looking for a fight. They find one in Nia Jax, who throws some people around and then scarpers, so that ruins the fun a little bit. Shayna Baszler, though, really benefiting from the association with Raw Underground. Montez Ford beats up Andrade, who has lost almost every match all year. Not a good look. Finally, Shawn Michaels gets punted in the head, which no one saw coming. It may sound like I'm rushing through this, but that's basically all that happened. For the main event segment, which only had about 5 minutes, Shawn Michaels came down to talk, Orton came down to talk, Shawn got punted, and then Drew McIntyre got an RKO. He turned his back on the Viper. Why is everyone so dumb on this show? This show was ridiculously fast-paced, often nonsensical, with long recap sections, very short matches, and a lot of people being openly devalued. It was a difficult, at times painful watch that seemed to have forgotten that this is a go-home show for one of the biggest pay-per-views of the year. There was precious little character progression going on anywhere. Barely anyone even got to show off more than 2 or 3 moves in a ring. It felt like offcuts, bits that were filmed over the course of a couple of weeks and just thrown together to fill out a show. Retribution did nothing apart from force a commercial break that was going to happen anyway. Raw Underground, however, was a highlight of this show. I do feel with the addition long-term of Dolph Ziggler and Shayna Baszler, they are beginning to find their feet. And while there are some people, for example Dolph Ziggler and the Viking Raiders, that have been assigned to Raw Underground, Shane McMahon is pushing for the use of more people. People like Riddick Moss, people like Shayna Baszler, who can do with recovering a bit of momentum. He is doing very good things with them, and that is one of the reasons so many people did double duty during this show. Really though, that's the only thing of value on this show. Baszler had a good night. Everything else was a mess. My Twitter poll for the show doesn't entirely agree with me. They give the show a 37% okay rating, and it just leans into the positive with a 29% good over a 25% bad. Personally, I enjoyed it less than my Twitter followers. Let me know what you thought of this week's Raw down in the comments. I've been Tom Collier, and thank you for joining me.